Old people, I've said many times, the only difference between them and us is they got there first. But politicians tend to forget that. Elderly Australians are back in the news now with the budget and pension discussions, but also because of recent findings, the coronial findings on the Quakers Hill nursing home tragedy. To discuss these issues, the CEO of the Aged Care Development Network, Michael Maher. Good evening.
Good evening, Darren.
Now, Quakers Hill, you would hope that that'd be a once-in-a-lifetime horror story, that you're not going to have some drug addict who's going to burn down a nursing home to hide his crimes and kill 14 people on the way through.
I believe it was a perfect storm, which would be a once in a lifetime. To get a registered nurse who's a drug addict with mental issues and a psychopathic disorder where he thinks that to cover a relatively small personal drug issue crime, I should burn down a facility and murder a few dozen people is the situation. I think that's a once in a lifetime, definitely. Yeah.
But the coroner, now this is all 3 years ago, but the coroner has come out with some urgent demands. We did highlight something that's not only at Quakers Hill, but I suspect in many nursing homes, things like access to the property, evacuation of patients and residents at a time of crisis, whether it be fire or flood or whatever?
There were 5 key recommendations or 5 key areas that were recommended around New South Wales fire and rescue advancements, a lessons learned document by the peak bodies, some changes to security around access to Schedule 8 drugs. The main one which has caused concern is AHPRA is the registration body for nurses. And the coroner recommended that AHPRA should increase its powers on the information that it gathers around the people who fall under AHPRA, i.e. tracking where they work, how long they work for, and that employers should have to register when they started, when they left. The problem is only 10% of aged care workers come under AHPRA. The majority of people who deliver direct care don't fall under AHPRA, and so therefore would still not be covered under this.
So what it leaves is these situations, I covered this story a while ago too, where somebody commits some misdemeanour or a crime or a cover-up at a nursing home, they quit that job or they get sent away from that job to a different nursing home. They can start up again there and there's no record of it. Now, there's a case I had where a woman had drowned, a resident had drowned in a fountain. And what they did, they put her back in bed.
I remember the story.
Yeah, they put her back in bed and said she died in bed when she hadn't. And a brave refugee nurse who was a whistleblower, and she was almost penalised over it. It was a terrible time. But those sorts of things, moving people like priests and parishes, moving to another nursing home, how do you stop that? How do you fix it?
It is a major problem right now if a carer almost kills someone, but doesn't quite. So it's not a police matter, so it won't show up on the criminal check when they move. They don't want the families to find out, so they quietly push them out the back door and they go down the street and knock on the door and apply for a job there. There is no way to find out their employment history, the almost criminal matter, etc. There isn't an apparatus to do that, and that is extremely scary, considering that these people do the majority of the direct care work to our family members.
And you've also got, not only in nursing homes, but in disabled care. We've had the scandals here with 5 people who have been charged on sexual offences against disabled people. And I know it happens to elderly people as well, where there have been cover-ups a la the churches, where for the good name of the nursing home or the good name of the institution, they've covered it up. Now, that's another area where it's very hard to flush out.
It is very hard to flush out, and we need some changes, and I think we need to change the conversation. We need to refocus some of the attention away from the residents to the people who actually work in aged care. If we don't start supporting them in a variety of ways, including looking into having mechanisms to look into the history, we won't ever change this story. But first, I'd really like to say the majority of people who work in aged care are excellent at what they do.
Underpaid.
And underpaid. There's 2,800 facilities. 300,000 workers looking after about 200,000 residents in residential aged care. There are so many working parts, yet there are so few problems. The majority of it happens very well. And as you say, most of them are not well paid, and they do 110%. They really do. If we can help them better, it would be good for them.
All right. Here's a case you may not be able to answer. What happens when somebody gives a power of attorney, endearing, I don't know the expression now, an endearing power of attorney to somebody? And I know one case there where the children decided that the parent should no longer have traditional medicine, that it should all be homeopathy, and no more painkillers. Now, the nurses then are powerless, aren't they? They have to follow that procedure.
I can't speak on this particular matter as an expert, but as a layman who spends a lot of time in aged care facilities, if I was working as a nurse or as a care attendant in an aged care facility and I can hear a resident crying all day because they're in pain, I wouldn't be too happy with the family member who doesn't see them every day, does not have to look after them every day, but who's made that decision that they can't take pain medicine.
Yeah. I don't know if this applies here as much. I presume it would, but I noticed a report I saw just the other day in California where the claims that some patients are being over-medicated because it makes it easier to keep them, and this is a decision not by the nurses, decision by the aged care facility or a nursing home facility to over-medicate because it keeps people, it's easier to control somebody who's medicated than it is just have somebody who's walking around the grounds all the time in the middle of the night.
I can't really comment on that. Most of the people I know in aged care, from the management down, are dedicated, love what they do. They certainly don't do it for the pay. Yeah. And I wouldn't say that they do the wrong.
There's another area here which probably also is outside your expertise, but, and putting this very bluntly, old people don't pay close enough attention to the fine print when they sign up for nursing homes because they're going to die. They don't worry too much about what's going to happen to their assets afterwards, or they haven't looked at the fine print. Because things like fees, deferred fees, the bond you pay, there's no interest paid on the bond, could be $300,000, could be $500,000, and yet there's no check on the nursing home, could be spending that money on luxury yachts, the owners, and rather than, it's not like put into trust, is it? It just goes into the coffers. So surely there should be more federal controls over how nursing home funds are handled. Is that fair?
I'm, again, not an expert in it, but there is a lot of control over the money and the bonds and what you need to do with the bonds.
Yeah, because we've seen cases where aged facilities have closed down, they've gone bust, and then you're having this horror story of families having to try, and this affects the workers as well, not getting paid their super, not getting paid their entitlements, families having to move their mum or their dad or their auntie or their uncle to another facility, and that's why there should be really tough controls over where the money goes in and how it's held on to.
Agree totally.
You agree? Nicely put. Okay, going back to Quakers Hill briefly, the coroner said there's some urgent things to be instituted. I noticed that the Opal Care, I think it's called, they have like 60 facilities. Nobody from them was actually represented at the hearing, and that upset a lot of the families. Nobody from management was actually there to hear what was brought down. How confident are you and the workers that things will be done rapidly?
Are you referring to the coroner's recommendations?
Yes.
The coroner's recommendations, some of them, the ones regarding aged care providers, I don't think some of them are realistic. The APRA changes.
Because you said APRA only represents 10% of the...
That's right. So APRA's jurisdiction doesn't fall over workers. I still think we need
I guess it should be a membership thing where all aged care workers belong to some organisation. Now, I know being suggestions they should also have to wear an official armband or something. I know that's the way to go. But there should be some situation where you can tell if Joe Blow moves from aged care centre 1 under a cloud or not to aged care centre B, then the next person and the people who take their mum and dad there should know.
They should. In short, they should. Last year, we interviewed about 20 CEOs and senior managers in aged care about what are your challenges moving forward. And the number one is how do we attract and retain quality people? It is all focused on the people. And one of them is how do we track where they've been? What is their education background? What is their employment history? There isn't a membership association like that, and I think it is paramount that we set one up. The government is loath to do it, an APRA style or different, for two reasons. An industry body requires two things. One, you've got to pay, and if you're a nurse and you're earning $70,000 to $80,000 a year or above, and you're asked to pay a $200 membership fee, you can do that. But if you're a carer earning $42,000 a year, that's a struggle. So financially it's hard. Also, a membership body or a peak body of some nature usually requires teeth of some nature, usually continuing education responsibility. Again, for a nurse that's usually okay. But aged care is full of people who are poorly educated, lacking in numeracy and IT skills. English as a second language is extremely common among the aged care workforce. So if you suddenly put the burden of mandatory training every year on top of them, same as nurses, plus and or a membership fee, you would have a mass exodus, and we can't afford that. We don't have enough people as it is.
Even as that is true. All right. Michael Maher, good to talk to you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for your time.
Do it again. That's the CEO of the Aged Care Development Network, Michael Maher.